I am the Education and Outreach Manager here at the Sternberg. I'm along with our fearless leader and director, Dr. Reese Barrick. We are here in the Paleontology Collections area of the Sternberg Museum, and we're going to talk today about some fossil sharks that came from our area. So I will give you the honor, since you're closer to our celebrity shark here. If you would like to introduce, well, let's. I guess we should sort of recover some of the things we talked about this morning. Of course, Kansas, which is where we're located, is famous for its late Cretaceous era limestone rock beds, which represents about roughly between 100 million and about 70 million years of time, depending on which rock unit you're looking at. So we have many very good specimens of marine organisms, vertebrates and invertebrates, that once existed in the seaway that was over Kansas during that time period. So one of those organisms would be a shark. So how do we tackle sharks? Sharks are very good at what they do.
Sharks are probably, basic shark biology hasn't changed much in 400 million years. I mean, so sharks were some of the first, fish, groups of fish, of cartilaginous fish that showed up in the Devonian. And they had pretty similar shape, morphology, biology that they do now. Sharks have gone up in a couple of strange and weird, bizarre things through time, and most of them have gone extinct. But your basic torpedo-shaped animal with sharp teeth,
great white-looking sharks,
hasn't changed a whole lot. And so one of the things about sharks, they are cartilaginous. So usually most of their skeletal material doesn't preserve, and the only thing that has preserved through a lot of time has just been the teeth.
So what is cartilage? Well, cartilage is a structural material, but it's not as hard as bone or tooth. So it's the stuff that your ears are made of, the tip of your nose, stuff that holds your kneecaps on. It's a structural material that holds our bodies together, but it's not as hard as bone. So that's kind of what makes sharks really kind of adaptable, I think, is in part their cartilage skeletons.
Yeah, so it makes them really good in their survival techniques, but makes them tough to find in the fossil record other than their teeth. And we'll talk about some variations in that, how that has changed through time also. But in the Cretaceous, the seaway time, we had sort of new food resources that basically expanded by bazillions the number of fish and number of different food items that sharks could eat. So sharks, we have a lot of different species of them in the Western Interior Seaway. Some of them looked fairly similar, but gave us a pretty big size range, from things that were great white shark size or even larger to things that were fairly small. Your sort of dogfish-sized sharks. So there's lots of sharks, lots of different sizes, and we keep finding more and more of them all the time. Even though people love to go out and find shark's teeth, every once in a while we find even some new things. And it's pretty cool, because one of those new things was just actually named, was it a month or so ago? Not too long ago. And if you come over here, you can take a look, and here's our newest shark from Kansas, called Cretotus houghtnorum. It's basically named after the family who owned the ranch, the Houghtons, and it's a part of the same genus, Cretotus. So it's got a species name, houghtnorum. It's very cool. You can see from the picture, it looks very great white sharkish, and it probably would have looked very much like that. What's cool is right down here, you can see are the teeth from the specimen, and the species was named from these teeth and some vertebrae we found. This is what we call a type specimen. A type specimen is
the specimen or specimens for which a species is named. So these teeth are special because they're the definition of Cretotus hautnorum. So that's pretty cool. And you can see the shapes of the teeth here. They got, very long. They become curved and a bit narrow. So they're very sharp, very good aggressive style of a carnivorous shark. And it's pretty cool because this definition of this species is here at the Sternberg Museum. So this is just one of a number of these types of sharks, similar looking sharks, that we have at the Sternberg. One of the other cool things that I alluded to before about the Cretaceous is sharks, their vertebrae are not made out of bone. They're made out of cartilage. But in the Cretaceous, sharks started to calcify their vertebra. What does that mean? It means, calcify is like, shells. If you got a clam shell, it's made out of calcite. So sharks started to calcify, or sort of turn their vertebra into sort of carbonate type of material. So we all of a sudden got a chance to find preserved vertebra. So in the Cretaceous, we find not only sharks' teeth, but also their vertebra. And so we have some of those from this particular shark, Cretotus. And you can see that they're pretty big, so you can get an idea of the size of the shark. Right? So this is part of his backbone. And when you look closely at shark vertebra, which is kind of neat, is you can kind of see little lines through here. Maybe we can find a little better one to look at. Here's a perfect one. All right? So you can see that there's a bunch of concentric circles or lines in the vertebra, and each of those are growth lines. So we can have an idea of how fast the shark grew. And there's some discussions about whether these are annual growth lines or seasonal growth lines. So we're not certain that these represent how old, as far as the number of years that the shark is. But they are growth lines, and you can see basically they grew in concentric circles. So at one point in time, the vertebra was only this big, and then it kept growing with each of these growth lines, which is pretty cool. So we can have a better idea of how these sharks lived and grew because we do have their vertebra. The other thing you notice is these vertebrae are very round, and they're very disc shaped. So here's another one, and you can see that they're not very long, elongated. Fish vertebrae a lot of times are very elongated, whereas the sharks are fairly flattened most of the time, and they're very disc shaped. So that's one of the things that will tell you the difference between a shark and a fish vertebra, is just the shape, overall shape of the vertebra. And these are pretty simple looking guys, but kind of cool. All right, let's take a look.
So,
Over here. Go ahead.
I just had a thought pop into my head. That happens sometimes. And then I have impulse control and I just make noises. Oh! So, if anybody's watching, give us a shout out. What is the most famous fossil shark that you can think of? Somebody shoot me a name real quick. I'm looking. Somebody shoot me a name. First fossil, most famous fossil shark you can think of. I want to see if we get the right answer. Come on, somebody type it. Somebody. I know there's at least 30 people out there watching us. When you think of fossil shark, when you think of ancient shark, what name comes into your head? You seeing anything, Rachel? Quiet out there.
Megalodon.
Megalodon, there it is. And Jeremy is our winner. So Megalodon, let's talk about Megalodon for a second. So just for size comparison, do we have an accessible Cretotus tooth over there? So we've got a Megalodon tooth here. Just to give you an idea, we'll use an Ian hand for scale. All right, so just to give you an idea, and we'll compare that to our Cretotus. So you'll see two things. Number one, you'll see a large size difference, but you also see a little bit of a difference in shape of that tooth. So these animals were probably doing, or at least eating, slightly different kinds of things. So Reese, what would you guess a megalodon was eating?
Well, megalodons, you can see that they have fairly wide teeth, and they have a little bit of sort of serrations, but they had to have very large prey for these teeth to rip into them. So megalodons were probably eating actually large mammals like whales. They could have been eating things like early pinnipeds. Pinniped means sea lions and seals and things like that. And they were around when a lot of early even baleen whales were around. So it was very much probably a mammal eater more than anything else. Of course, when they were smaller, they probably ate fish, they probably ate sharks, they probably ate a lot of different things because a megalodon wasn't a 40-foot long shark when it was first, hatched. So they ate different things throughout their life, but as an adult, they're probably eating a lot of whales.
What do we suppose a Crototus would have been eating with this shape of tooth?
Well, a Crototus is also, for the Cretaceous, a fairly large animal, which means that it's probably, we had some large fish, like Xiphactinus and things, so it was probably eating some fish, but there was also a lot of small to medium-sized plesiosaurs.
Let's do another size comparison here.
Oh, there we
So
go.
I have with me a tiger shark. And you can see it's got a lot of teeth. And we'll compare our Crototus tooth to the teeth in the jaws of our tiger shark. And again, you can see a pretty significant difference in size and a bit of a difference in shape of the tooth. So what do you suppose tiger sharks are good at eating?
Tiger sharks.
Not tigers.
Not tigers? Oh, goodness gracious. Tiger sharks, they're a little bit of garbage cans of the ocean. But they're probably going to eat a lot of smaller prey, like lots of fish. They'll eat some tin cans. They'll eat some...
Yummy.
But they're probably more fish eaters than anything else. They might eat some small... Well, they're tropical, so they're not going to eat a lot of large mammals. They might grab a bird here and there, a seabird or something. But they're going to eat lots of fish.
So you can see the impressive sort of tooth replacement system that sharks have sort of developed over time. And that is a pretty common thing throughout shark history, is these sort of shifting forward, folded back teeth arrangements.
So these sharks are amazing because they have an infinite number of replaceable teeth. And so you can see that the teeth up here are the ones being used. And then there's always bunches of replacements. We can even count. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows of teeth in some instances. And why are there so many teeth for sharks? Because if you look out at the attachment of these outermost teeth, they're not deeply rooted, right? So they're not stuck way deep in a jaw. There's no bony jaw for these teeth to be rooted in to hold them in place like we have. So oftentimes when a shark eats something, it will lose some teeth. There will be some teeth that will get ripped out of its jaw when it grabs something to eat. And so there's always a need for new teeth to be popping in and replacing the old ones that just were torn out when it had its last meal. So sharks are great because they don't need a dentist. They've got new teeth coming in all the time. But because they don't have bones, they have more cartilaginous jaw, they don't have deep roots to be able to hold the teeth in very securely. So they do lose them very easily. And that's the same for whether, if you're a megalodon and you're eating a whale, you got a big tooth, but again, the roots are not very deep. So these are going to get ripped out of its jaw if it's grabbing a whale to eat about as easily as the tiger shark's is if it eats a big fish.
So you can see even in our Crototus display cases over here, there are many teeth that are identifiable, that are well preserved, even in our little field jacket here that says "Do not touch," and I'm totally ignoring it. Sorry, Mike. I'm pretty sure that's your handwriting. Anyways, I just wanted to give a shout out to our associate curator, Mike Everhart, who in part was one of the people to describe this new species along with Kenshu Shimada. So I just wanted to acknowledge their part in this. But as I was saying, teeth are going to be probably the most common fossil of just about any animal, and I think any fossil situation. But in the case of sharks, they're going to be more numerous because what we're looking at is enamel-covered teeth, which have to be tough because that's what everything uses to eat. So they are going to be the most likely preserved part of an animal, and especially a cartilaginous animal. So that's why we find so many shark's teeth in this area of Kansas, because they have the ability, A, to be preserved, they're super tough, and B, they have the ability to be transported by things like waters and even wind if it's strong enough, and there is strong wind around here. So they don't get messed up when they get moved around. So that's one of the things. So what have you got to show us over here?
Well,
looks like we're going in a direction that is something like not all sharks have big pointy shark teeth. Shark teeth? Sharp teeth.
Sharp teeth.
Sharp
Shark teeth.
I just forgot how to speak English again. It's been happening, you know. I just wander through the museum alone and make weird noises. I don't even have to use a language anymore.
Well, sharks, again, adapt to all kinds of food resources or prey resources that are around at any given time. And if you notice in the Cretaceous, some of our most common invertebrates are things called inoceramids, which are giant clams. And there's lots of clams in the seaway.
I'm going to go find one. I think we have one. I think I know where one is.
But if you're going to eat a clam, a tooth like this is not going to work very well because it's pretty narrow and pointed, and like I said, it rips out of the mouth very easily. So you're not going to be able to bite through a thick clamshell with a sharp tooth. You're basically going to break it off and tear it out of your mouth. So there are some sharks that are adapted to being able to eat this abundant source of prey, and they have teeth that look like this. And you can see they're kind of button shaped, and they've got the same sort of striations, but they're pretty solid, right? So they're very thick, solid, a bit flattened teeth, and they're really kind of cool because they also come in the hundreds of them within a jaw all over their mouth. So actually, if you come walk over this way a little bit, I'll show you a really cool thing where you see all of these together. We're going to sneak around the corner and you can get an idea of all the different drawers that all have shark's teeth in them.
So just for reference, before we get too carried away with all the other teeth, so what this is a clamshell, and it's actually been pretty flattened. And what's going on here is you can see this is the clamshell, and it's encrusted with oysters. This is like an oyster colony that's on the outside. So the sea floor would have been plentiful. This is from Trego County. And you can kind of see that there would have been a really, really good food source in the form of shellfish like this. All right, so
Bring the shell here.
I'm bringing the shell here.
So I showed you these particular teeth that belong to a shark called Tychodus.
That's with a P.
With a P, PT, like Pteranodon. Pteranodon with a P. We have
Tychodus.
So here is an actual nice drawer that shows all of the Tychodus teeth that you'd find in a jaw. So it's not just a narrow row of teeth like a lot of sharks or other animals, but a whole pavement of them where they could use to come down and crunch and to crack open shells and things in order to get at the yummy, tasty insides of them. So this is sort of a little bit more what the inside of a Tychodus jaw would look like. And so you have hundreds of teeth with large ones in the center, and they get smaller towards the edge of the mouth. And there's,
I'm going to set this down right
there we go. And you can get an idea of the clam size and how these things could be able to crunch down from top and bottom and be able to basically crunch and destroy and break up a clamshell. So sharks adapting to food sources that we don't typically think about sharks eating. Sometimes we think about rays and things like that, and skates might eat some snails and clams, but we don't think about big sharks. And Tychodus was probably the largest shark in the Cretaceous Seaway. These things got to be much larger even than a great white shark. They were really huge sharks, but they basically stayed along the bottom where they could find this sort of very clammy prey to eat. So I think that makes them kind of some of the coolest sharks around, because they did do a bizarre thing. They still kept the shape kind of as your typical shark, but they completely changed their teeth and mouth structure.
So we have somebody asking, can we talk about the great white shark? Well, one of the things about the great white shark is it is what we would consider relatively modern shark. Although I've heard rumors, maybe Dr. Barrett could either confirm or deny this, that the megalodon may have very well been outcompeted by the great white shark. Is this a consensus in science, do you think?
Well, there's a lot of discussion about how to classify megalodons and whether they belong to the same genus or a different genus
Can I close
than the great white shark. The consensus now is it is a completely different genus. They probably, instead of, used to be called Carcharodon megalodon, and a great white shark is in the genus Carcharocles, so they're very similar. A lot of recent work actually puts megalodon into a new genus called Otodus. Fairly similar.
Science is always changing, always redefining, always redeveloping.
But megalodon was, as adults were giant sharks, and they needed very large food resources. And great white sharks are a lot smaller. At one time they were a bit bigger than they are today. Our largest great white shark today is about 23 feet long. So a megalodon that's 40 feet long is much bigger. And one of the things that happened towards the end of the Pleistocene, right? The megalodons were around from about 20 million years ago to 24 million years ago, all the way down to 2 million years ago. So they survived for a long time during this period when there's rapid evolution of a lot of different whales and dolphins and things like that. Great white sharks were around about the same time, but they were much smaller. And so they ate a lot of, seals and sea lions and things like that. And at the end of the Pleistocene, there was a big extinction of a lot of different animals. We have a great extinction of animals on the plains. We lost a lot of animals. But lost a lot of things in the ocean too. And there was if not an extinction, a major reduction in the number of large whales that were around that would be the main food source for megalodon. But yet the food source for smaller mammals was still there for great white sharks. So they managed to survive much better than the megalodons did, because there's just a more consistent food resource for them. And they could jump over to eating lots of fish because they were a smaller size, where there was enough fish in the size range that they could eat if they couldn't find any marine mammals to eat.
If you think about how much energy it must take to power a body that is roughly 50 feet long and could swallow a truck or a Volkswagen bus, that's a lot of energy. So your food source has to be plentiful. And
if any of you happen to remember, we had the Megalodon exhibit here last summer, and there was an exhibit that showed the number of tuna cans it would take for a Megalodon to eat in a single day. It was about 2,000 pounds of food every day. Or
Something like that.
Something like
Sounds
that.
right to me.
So that's a lot of food to be able to find on a consistent basis. And you might just get a meal once a week or once a month when you get that large shark or large whale that you get to eat. So if you reduce the number of whales and you have to go further and farther in between to find them, life can become rough pretty quickly.
So, of our Kansas Cretaceous era sharks, what would you compare, I guess, most closely with a great white?
Probably would be Cretoxyrhina.
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 Where can we find a Cretoxyrhina?
If you come to the museum, you just have to walk down the Cretaceous Fossil Gallery, right smack dab in the middle. You will see a beautifully preserved Cretoxyrhina, from all the vertebra up to a jaw with all the teeth still in it, which is pretty cool.
We thought about filming up there, but we thought there might be more sharks down here, so.
And there's a lot of great white type of sharks. We've got Squally corax, we've got Cretotus, we've got Cretoxyrhina. There's a whole number of sharks. And we've got, all of these things are drawers of different sharks.
And if anybody has an interest in reading some scientific literature about Cretaceous age sharks found in Kansas, Dr. Kenshu Shimada, that's Kenshu Shimada, look up his name, do a Google scholar search. He's the guy that does a lot of work on these kinds of things, and you can probably read some of his publications. And I know Mike Everhart also has a lot of really good information on sharks and other things that lived in Kansas on his website, Oceans of Kansas. So if you just Google search Oceans of Kansas, it's an awesome resource. So definitely if you have a bunch of questions and we're not moving fast enough to answer those questions, those are some good resources to follow up on after our little discussion today.
If you look over here, just because we happen to mention it, here's a whole drawer full of Cretoxyrhina vertebra. So these are basically our closest things to being great white sharks from the Cretaceous. And so we have lots of vertebra, and you can see, if you look at a single one here, you can see all the growth lines. You can see relatively how narrow it is. It's not a whole lot different from Cretotus, but a little bit. You can see all the growth pattern between the two plates of the shark. Some of them are a little narrower, some of them get a little wider. But this is, again, your basic shark vertebra. And these all belong to Cretoxyrhina, which is kind of cool.
So now that you're on the growth of the shark, we did have a question about how do we figure out their lifespan, and did they live with dinosaurs at the same time with dinosaurs?
Cretoxyrhina did live at the same time of dinosaurs because they become from our Cretaceous Seaway, which was when we had our greatest number of different types of dinosaurs. So yes, these guys would have lived with dinosaurs, only in the ocean as opposed to on land. And as a matter of fact, there would have been some sharks, or we talked about Nodosaurus, our dinosaur from Kansas, that we found in the Seaway. So there are some dinosaurs that lived along the coastline of the ocean that died, and the tides would have swept them out into the ocean, where they would bloat and float out to the middle of the ocean. And sharks, like Cretoxyrhina or Squally corax, would probably go out and scavenge on them, pop their bubbles. Ooh, it would have been a smelly mess. But that would have allowed the skeletons to sink down to the bottom of the ocean, where we can get buried and we could find some dinosaur bones. But they would have been chewed on by Squally corax was probably a better scavenger. Cretoxyrhina is a pretty good predator. But these are all Cretoxyrhina teeth. So they look very great white sharkish in some senses. So you can see the similarities, and if you look closely there you see some differences between what we had between this and Cretotus. But very cool sharks. Yes, they did live with the same ages, same time as dinosaurs.
And then how do you tell their lifespan?
Well, one of the best ways to tell their lifespan is coming back to these vertebrae. So each of these growth lines is a growth series, and there's some suggestions that each of these lines might even be annual. So you can get a rough estimate of how old the shark is by just counting the number of individual growth lines that you find. Yeah, what's this? This is cool. Take the shark's tooth, and there you can count each of the lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So you can count all of the growth lines, kind of like a tree ring.
That's awesome. Why do we only find shark's teeth?
Well, like I said, we used to find only shark's teeth from the Devonian through the Jurassic for the most part. But in the Cretaceous, we start finding lots of these vertebrae. And these vertebrae we start to find because the cartilage becomes calcified. So it's using some of the same sort of materials that you would find in a clam shell or a snail shell to strengthen and harden their vertebra, which allows them to be found and fossilized as well. So from the Cretaceous on, we can start finding vertebra. And a shark skeleton is much different. They don't have a lot of ribs. Those that or other parts of their skeleton are not calcified, so we don't find them. So we're basically left with vertebra and teeth from the Cretaceous forward.
Did sharks eat?
Okay, I was going to say we have a ton of questions coming in, so let's
Yeah.
start getting on some of these questions here. So let me back up.
So did any sharks eat shelled cephalopods? Hopefully I pronounced that correctly.
That's a really good question, and I don't know that we actually have found cephalopod material. I think sharks probably did eat things like, they could have caught belemnites that had their little bit of a shell that's internal instead of external. But shark's teeth are not good for biting into shells. Again, if you take a look at a shark's tooth, here's a little jaw with teeth in it. Because their roots are so shallow, they would not be able to penetrate easily into armor. So they would have a tough time cutting through a cephalopod shell. Only the Tychodus, which we have munching on things like clam shells and things, they could have potentially gone after and crunched on a shelled cephalopod. Did they? I don't know. That's a good question. If we had more stomach contents, we could figure that out. These teeth are from what's a shark called Squalicorax, which is also from the Cretaceous. And you find these teeth in a lot of different things, like the bones of some of our dinosaurs that were bloat and float, mosasaur skeletons, turtle skeletons. So these guys actually do have little punctures and scrapes into bones that are recognizable from this species. So we know that these guys would have been really good scavengers. If there's something dead, they're going to get to it and start tearing it apart and eating it. And so these guys are really cool sharks, and you can tell the difference in the shape of these teeth, which are kind of recurved a little bit, offset, compared to the teeth of the Cretoxyrhina, which are a bit more vertical.
Here's a related question. So Charlie, who is 9 years old, hi Charlie, he wants to know what types of sharks were alive during the time of the dinosaurs.
Oh, wait.
Well, Charlie, with the exception of Megalodon and the tiger shark we were just talking about, all of the sharks we're showing you today were alive during the time of dinosaurs. So everything we're looking at today was in the ocean when the dinosaurs were on the land. So that's one question there. And Florence wonders what their lifespan would have been. Did we already answer that? Mm-hmm. Okay. Sorry guys, I'm behind, but I just want to give you guys a shout out for...
Yeah, lots of these, the larger sharks are going to live probably for over 100 years. Smaller sharks are going to live in the 20 or 30 years probably.
Okay, so the fish within a fish inside of it, are they actual fish or are they sharks? Well, they're fish, but then so are sharks. So, it kind of goes back to that weird thing we were saying about turtles and tortoises.
All sharks
Are fish, but not all fish are sharks. So the big difference is the fish within a fish and the fish within it, which is called Gillicus, Those are bony fish, so they don't have cartilage skeletons. So they are what we call bony fish. Whereas most of the sharks that we're looking at are in fact fish, but they have cartilage skeletons, which makes them a little bit different. So there's that question. Let's see here. What other questions have we got? Is there any evidence of sharks attacking mosasaurs? Yes. If you check out the video that we ran earlier today, we actually showed a pretty cool section of our museum upstairs where we kind of go through some of the evidence that mosasaurs were preyed upon by sharks as well as other mosasaurs. So definitely check that out because we do go over that pretty well, and we can actually see some good evidence of, I believe it's a Squalicorax chewing on a mosasaur. So if you get a chance, review our earlier video today. What other questions have we got?
Well, I guess the question's about turtles. We do have an episode about turtles. We did that yesterday. You can go and view our playlist on Facebook and rewatch that episode.
Are you asking if sharks ate turtles? Is that a question you might be asking? If so, let us know and we can definitely answer
Yeah.
that. Let's
Yeah,
see.
there is a question about if they do eat turtles
Okay.
later
And
down.
my guess is yes, if they could sink their teeth into it, they would probably.
Sharks oftentimes attack and eat sea turtles, but usually they're flippers because sea turtles can't retract their feet in like terrestrial turtles can. So they would be able to rip off their fins and eat them. This is just because people asked about the fish versus sharks. Here's a fish jaw, right? And you can see the teeth coming out. They can be larger or smaller, but you can see the jaw is very bony, right? So it looks like a fossil bone. And vertebra of our bony fish, you can see, are very different looking than those from our sharks. Whereas the sharks are basically concentric discs, the fish are are elongated instead of really narrow, and they are very curved in, like little discs, or cones on each side of them. See how they're kind of inverted cones, and they've got a lot more morphology or shape in between the shells, or in between the vertebra. So very different looking sorts of things. It's very easy to recognize whether you have a fish or a shark vertebra. And when you find the teeth, you oftentimes don't find the jaws for sharks, but when you find the teeth for fish, you find the whole jaw because it's nice and bony. So bony fish versus cartilaginous fish is the difference between our sharks and our Xiphactinus, our fish within a fish.
How many species of sharks do we know of?
Oh wow! I don't know that I would know the answer to that. Many. Sharks have had a very, 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 very long run. What did we say? About 400 million years, 300 million years? So there are many, many, many species of sharks that have existed, and I would imagine there are quite a few currently existing sharks, but I don't have that exact number. So that would be one of those things where instead of making a fool out of myself and guessing wrong, I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, I mean that's a tough one. If you're
It's
going
tough.
through time, problem is you've got 400 million years worth of sharks
Right.
to go through.
Right, so sharks have been very successful animals. So there have been a lot of them, and there have been some strangely shaped sharks throughout time. Any other questions?
Have you guys seen the Meg movie?
Oh yes. Who doesn't love watching sharks eating people? I'm glad it didn't eat the puppy dog. I was really worried about the puppy dog. But I will say this, as much as I enjoy seeing a movie, I keep in mind that it's not real, it's fictitious. So the chances of finding a megalodon alive today is pretty much zero because they're extinct. However, we've got some pretty darn big great whites out there, and that's good enough for me. Any other questions that we can answer while we're streaming live? If not, we'll wrap it up, and unless Reese has more stuff he wants to show off, we will definitely keep monitoring the questions as they come in. as people share this around and review this, even when it's not live. We're trying to keep track of all the questions that are asked. We all get notified when somebody makes a comment. So, A, ask lots of questions. B, share. C, like. The more people spread this stuff around and share it to their friends and like it, and the more word gets out that we're doing these things twice a day, the more people we can reach in this really weird time that we're living in. So,
When will be the next time we'll be live?
when will be the next time? Very good question. We're going to take the weekend off, so we won't be doing much on Saturday or Sunday. But we will be back on Monday, and for the rest of the week, we'll be doing 2 of these a day at 10 a.m. Central and 2 p.m. Central. Almost forgot. I almost said 9 p.m.
That's really late. I'm not sure I'm going to be here that late.
I haven't been sleeping much lately. So we will continue to do our live feeds twice a day as long as this thing keeps going. So just check in with us on Monday, and we'll.
You have to stay at least through, keep us going at least through Wednesday, because that's when I get to bring my puppy dog in.
Yeah. Well, now that the dog's out of the bag, we are going to do something kind of interesting later next week, where we'll be bringing in some dogs, and then maybe talking about some of their predecessors, their ancestors. So stay tuned. We've got a lot of cool stuff planned. We're going to try to start thinking a little bit outside the box, things that you maybe wouldn't normally see at a museum. So until then, we're thinking about you guys. If you've got any questions, suggestions, comments, please send them to us. We don't have much else to do right now. And we hope everybody's staying safe, healthy, and happy. We'll see you on Monday.